Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Paraka. I'm coordinator for the Year of Morocco, and it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce our team of speakers, Dr. Catherine Lewis and her team from the Museum, Archives and Rare Books and Holocaust Museum, who have done extensive work in Morocco. We've partnered with them on numerous Year of projects, and we're really grateful for all the work that they do promoting global understanding and community engagement.
Great, thanks Dan. It's nice to see everybody. So this is going to be kind of a team effort. This partnership, as you'll see, has deep roots and has been really exciting, I think, for our team, and I think for our team and colleagues in Casablanca. So we've called this partnership, or at least the presentation, Across the Ocean, Sustaining a Museum Partnership. And it really has taken a lot of energy, and it's taken dozens and dozens of people, many of you who are sitting in this audience today. So I just want to give a brief overview of that history, that it did start in 2005. And there had been some informal exchanges between administrators and faculty in foreign language, some in global affairs, to start thinking about making some connections to a sister institution in Casablanca. But it was really 2007, I would say, that was the pivot. And that's what I think of as the beginning of the project. And President Bourkia from Hassan University in Casablanca came to visit while Betty Siegel was our president. And she was touring the campus and enjoying herself, sort of coming to know what an American university would look like in comparison to the Moroccan counterpart. And she visited the Museum of History and Holocaust Education, which is our World War II and Holocaust Museum over at the KSU Center. And she was impressed, I think, by the openness of the exhibit, its accessibility, its portability, and actually was really excited about the possibility of recreating that somewhere in Morocco. So at that meeting, she suggested that a delegation from Kennesaw actually come to work with colleagues in Morocco to help build what we believe has become certainly the first community-based museum in Morocco, and possibly in North Africa. So at that meeting, and that's what really happened between 2007 and 2008, we started a conversation about what a museum would look like and how our team might help. And it was a visit in 2009 where we really started the conversation of creating the Bimseek Community Museum. And what was exciting about that is we had a large delegation of administrators from and faculty from Kennesaw and from Hassan, but also community members, the mayor, other sort of civic leaders, in this multilingual conversation that was in Amazigh, French, Arabic, and English. And in the span of 2 hours, we came up with a name for the museum, we wrote its mission statement, and we drafted the first exhibit. And I joked at the end to our Moroccan delegation that if you had hired a consultant in America to do all three of those things for you, it would have cost you a cool $50,000. So we felt that that was money well spent, and quite a good visit. And Thierry Leger, who at the time was one of the associate deans, was the colleague who was with me. And it was then that we began a partnership with the U.S. State Department and the American Alliance of Museums for this Museums Connect project, which had a slightly different name before. But the idea was that cultural diplomacy made perfect sense if you think about cultural institutions making substantial exchanges and working together toward a single goal. And so we started this wonderful project in 2009, 2010, an oral history project between the Museum of History and Holocaust Education and the Bimseek Community Museum. And then ultimately, and I'll go backwards as we're talking, but I just want to give the whole umbrella. And ultimately, we got a second grant for the Identities project. And I know we're going to talk a bit about that. That became an online exhibit. So an oral history project was the first. The online exhibit was the second. And then we began planning for a World War II in Morocco exhibit that ultimately we took and opened in Morocco, which was really quite exciting. And then we have started Legacies of Slavery in Morocco with the U.S. So you can see that over this now almost 13-year period, it's been fairly substantial. We've had a number of exhibits. We've had a number of publications. We're working on a third. Right now, this is a series of Moroccan American studies created by the museum and the university at Hassan. And my colleague Jennifer Dickey and I joined Samir El-Azhar in doing a book on museums in a global community. We were invited by the American Alliance of Museums to invite other Museum Connect organizations that had made that partnership to write essays, and so that came out in 2013. So what's been nice about the project, and I think significant, is that it really has had a substantial output. It hasn't just been conversation, but that it's been meaningful work. And just to get a sense of what Museums Connect is, it really is sort of people-to-people diplomacy through the lens of museums. And Samir, in a press release in 2009, who was our colleague in Morocco, talked about this idea of telling people's stories as promoting mutual respect and understanding. And I think we would all agree, and we have some of our participants here today to talk about that, that the projects really generated a kind of warmth and collegiality across the Atlantic that we're really quite proud of. So with that, as we're thinking about the project in sort of at 30,000 feet, I think what has made it work really has been that we have been very strategic in our planning. What were the projects, how would we do them, how would we get them funded, and what would their final form be, and then how would we disseminate that research? The grant funding made a huge difference. We never would have been able to do this without the State Department's funding and the university's support. But it was also very student-centered from the beginning. The exchanges were student-based. And that made a huge difference. And we created a very collaborative model. There were certainly some challenges and at times power imbalances, but overall it was a very collegial and collaborative approach that we facilitated with the use of really basic technologies of Skype and email, and it made it possible for us to do so much back and forth and as we were sort of creating these products. But we also really invested in the relationship. We stayed in contact. We constantly were in conversation. And then finally, the curiosity. There was a tremendous amount of intellectual curiosity about Morocco, about the United States, and that fueled, I think, the partnership. And then finally, having just administrative support makes a huge difference. You've got to think strategically about that. So, of course, we created, as we said, using basic technologies. Facebook became important, though we found very quickly that students did not use Facebook in the way that we expected them to. The adults used it, but not the students, right? They had outgrown that technology a little bit. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Green, who participated in the first part of the project, which was the opening, the creation and opening of the Creating Community in Casablanca. It opened here at Kennesaw and then moved over to Morocco. So I will hand you the, clip yourself on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Green, and I'm going to speak as a student who participated in some of these collaborations, and also as now a staff member of Kennesaw State and the Museums, Archives, and Rare Books Department. So in 2008, I joined the group of students that were part of Museums and Community Collaborations abroad, and we worked together with the students in Casablanca through email, very early morning Skype sessions to kind of collaborate on what we wanted to do, introducing ourselves, brainstorming ideas, and thinking about what we wanted to accomplish together. And in 2009, I took my first trip to Morocco to work with the students there. And while we were there, they opened this community museum, a novel concept for Morocco because their museum culture was just starting to emerge while we were there. We visited some of the museums that they had, but they were nothing like the American museums that we had, even at the time. And while we were there, the students and the faculty advisor that we had, Sandra Bird, we all gave guest lectures on various parts of American culture. They have American Studies department there, and some of the students, especially the students that worked with us, spoke English as well as Arabic and French, so that we were able to communicate with them very well. And then after the first trip, we came home. They actually came to visit Kennesaw State. They came here and visited with us for a while, came to our lectures, were able to tour the campus, and then they went on to Washington, D.C. And saw what we would consider probably some of our greatest museums in the country. One of the things we did afterwards were a number of interviews. So we interviewed Muslim students and community members from the local area to just kind of get what it's like to be Muslim in the South, and that was something that we did. We filmed and transcribed those interviews to have at the museum. And then later I would return to Morocco in 2011, and we would extend more of our relationship with them. I was able to visit people that I had seen the first time, and that was fantastic. And it was also to help them further their country's museum culture. I would consider this trip or these trips probably some of the most pivotal moments that I had working with the students, going back and visiting with them. And the students, the administrators, they were such a warm and friendly group. It was a really rewarding experience for me, and to see that it continues and that we now have a year of Morocco I was excited that that was happening, and that these kinds of relationship, and this one specifically with Hassan has continued over the years. So
we're going to do another personnel change.
Big team.
Find somewhere on this dress I can clip this. Let's try that. Okay, thank you. So my first introduction to this project came through the lens of public history. I was living in Michigan in 2012, and I was transitioning from one job into becoming a consultant in museums and public history, and my main way of staying in touch with the community was through the Public Historian, which is the sort of major publication in public history. And I came across this article that was co-written by Dr. Lewis and Dr. Dickey, who's also here today, by students who participated in the project, and by our colleagues, or they weren't my colleagues yet, but the colleagues at Hassan University. And I was intrigued. I was excited. I had never seen anything quite like this being talked about. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of Kennesaw State University or the Museum of History and Holocaust Education. So at the time, what you see here, this Identities, Understanding Islam in a Cross-Cultural Context, was the newest product of this collaboration. And this was overseen by my predecessor at the Museum of History and Holocaust Education, Dr. Julia Brock. And this project is something of a digital exhibit. It's also a digital archive. It's a repository of the oral histories that Stephanie and others participated in recording and preserving. It's also a photography project. So it was a documentary effort in Metro Atlanta, Kennesaw area, and in Casablanca, looking at the ways that people lived their lives and how Islam fit into this. And so this uses technology, and technology has become kind of a running element as this project has evolved over time. So fast forward 3 years to 2015, when I first came on board as the curator of the Museum of History and Holocaust Education. And Dr. Lewis turned to me and said, we are really interested in continuing this ongoing partnership that we have with the Ben Messit Community Museum. And our colleague, Dr. Samir El-Azhar, has asked if we could co-produce a traveling exhibit about World War II in Morocco. So the relationship, and that needs to be in the context of the long-standing relationship between Morocco and the United States, but looking specifically at Operation Torch and the legacy, the cultural legacy, how Morocco has become a part of the American imagination. All of this played out. So this was one of the first projects that I coordinated. And we wanted it to be, to involve students on both sides of the Atlantic, but that was going to have to be different in the two different locations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we ended up involving 16 students in English and history and photography over at Hassan University, and 4 student researchers here at Kennesaw State University. So the Morocco in World War II exhibit has 12 panels, and we actually have both of our major exhibits in a version taped up on the wall. So maybe at the end we'll let the video camera kind of do a slow look at these exhibits that we've produced. But when we began this project, Dr. El-Azhar came to us and said, these are the areas I'd really like us to research. So we began with kind of looking at the history of the Kingdom of Morocco, the relationship, the 200 years of friendship between the United States and Morocco, the movie Casablanca. What role did that play in promoting involvement in World War II? It came out right before Operation Torch. And then Operation Torch itself, which is in a lot of ways kind of the dress rehearsal for the Normandy invasions, this idea of an amphibious assault. And Americans in Morocco during World War II, what was it really like? You know, there's a vision that's promoted through Casablanca, but what was it really like to be there? What did American culture do when it interacted with Moroccan culture? Then the contributions of Moroccan soldiers, the Goumier, I think that's how it's pronounced, who fought on behalf of the Allies. Moroccan Jews during World War II, this sort of unique relationship. Morocco was under Vichy French control, but the Moroccan king protected the Jewish citizens of Morocco from having their rights stripped away, from being deported to concentration camps. And then this ANFA, the Casablanca conference, where Roosevelt and Winston Churchill met basically to plan out the rest of the war. And then how is the war remembered? Where does legend intersect with reality? What role did espionage play? And ultimately, what is the legacy of this war? So we endeavored to pursue this project, but in some of, we had both challenges and successes, and in some of the challenges is where the real elements of this kind of museum diplomacy play out. So one of the major challenges is simply this distance, and Dr. Lewis talked about what we could use, the role that technology played to overcome the challenge of being so far apart. One of the main elements of this is the time difference. When do you find moments for teams of students to communicate with one another in real time? This was exacerbated by changes we had no control over. During the bulk of the time we were working on this exhibit, the Moroccan government and telecommunications, which are closely aligned, banned the use of Skype. So we were without that particular ability that we'd come to be, used to, that worked well for larger groups of people to talk to each other. And we found ourselves relying more on other forms of technology that would not necessarily allow us to talk together at exactly the same time. we used Basecamp. So as you can see, as this project has evolved over the past decade, as new opportunities, new technologies come along, we've kind of tried them all out. Everything from Facebook to WordPress to Basecamp. What Basecamp let us do was to develop these project pages, where there'd be a team of Moroccan researchers and one of our research students working together on a particular set of topics. And they could exchange what they'd learned through their research. They could post essays, they could post images, and we also followed through with Facebook, so they could communicate with each other that way as well. So this is how the project developed. Now, of course, language is an issue, not so much for the Moroccan students who all spoke fluent English, but for our students, Americans are not known for their foreign language skills. We at Kennesaw State University try to change this, just like everyone does in higher education, but what language do you study? Under what context? These are questions that Americans are constantly asking themselves and often conclude that they don't know what to do. They don't know what language to study. In Morocco, most people are fluent in English, in French, and in various Amazigh languages that are native to their smaller cultural groups. French is the sort of primary other source for historical documentation that would be most useful as we're working on these kinds of projects, but our students basically had to rely on translation, which many of the their Moroccan colleagues supplied very kindly. They would translate documents for us. Dr. Elazar would do the same thing. I have some French, but not as much as I'd like to have, but that was a challenge. Intellectual property law is another interesting element that American museums differ to some extent with our Moroccan colleagues, just in that we're kind of obsessed with it. We take copyright very, very seriously. We worry about everything from reproduction of images, how big they can be. Specifically, do we have a licensing agreement? And in Morocco, the desire to obtain information from every source and to disseminate that information seems to trump other kind of concerns. So our researchers would bring us wonderful material, and we would look at it and say, that's great, but can we put it in the exhibit? How can we put it in the exhibit? And so a lot of those issues kind of play out in our design. We have a wonderful designer in Zoila Torres, and she was able to take image sources and kind of make them a small enough component in the exhibit that we can feel comfortable claiming fair use, to some degree with images that we weren't completely sure about their provenance, and just kind of incorporating everything that we had into a design for our exhibit. So these are some examples of images that a combination of our researchers and the Moroccan researchers located, both in books, in archives, various web sources. This image here at the bottom was taken by Moroccan students of the cemetery in Casablanca, where American soldiers had been buried. So the other elements that came through were more in interpretation. These were areas where we also engaged in some of this museum diplomacy. The first was a learning experience for myself and for our students, which was really understanding what the difference is between Berber and Amazigh. Berber is a term that is derogatory. It has the same roots as barbarian, barbar, this idea that people are it's of Greek origin, and this idea that people are speaking an incomprehensible language, and that's how you define them. So understandably, Moroccan people do not prefer to use that term and prefer to use Amazigh, which is the term for the languages that are spoken in Morocco that are native to that space. So we shifted our usage. Anytime that my students had described Berber culture or Berber people, we shifted it to Amazigh. Another element, which I'll show you a few slides about, is the status of Western Sahara. And I know there will be a lecture about this in this Year of Morocco program continuing. And then our question of Morocco's Jewish community, and one could say this about any culture, that it's complicated. And how do you basically consolidate that into a very, very small aspect of a 12-panel exhibit? So that was something that we contended with. So I'll begin with this just briefly, this notion of Western Sahara. In the United States, we register that there is an ongoing conflict between the Kingdom of Morocco and the Sahrawi, and I apologize about my pronunciation, Sahrawi Democratic Republic, which is a group that would like to claim a space in Western Sahara as a sovereign nation. Morocco says, no, it's all Morocco. And the United States says, well, it's under contention. So the question of how do you portray this in a map was an element to our exhibit. And we first proposed what you see here as this kind of the second map with a porous border. So not two separate places, two separate states, but just this notion it's all one country, but there's this border between Morocco and Western Sahara. And when we proposed that to our colleagues, they turned to us and said, we're not comfortable with that. Any map of Morocco needs to look like this one. It needs to be one Morocco. And we said, well, this is being printed in Morocco. This is a collaborative effort. We will go with your preference to not include that border. So this actually led to some interesting developments. So our exhibit opened in 2017 at the Ben Mesik Community Museum, and you can see Dr. Lewis there standing with some of our colleagues and some of our the students that had worked on the exhibit in Morocco. And the U.S. consulate asked Ben Mesik if they could travel the exhibit to the consulate building for a conference to commemorate the anniversary of the Casablanca conference. And when they saw the exhibit, they said, hold on, we can't have this map of Morocco that does not show this porous border. And so they said, well, what are we going to do about that? Our colleagues turned to us. We said, well, it's up to you. We can easily print a version that does not include that, that shows the porous border. And they said, we don't want that. And we said, okay, that's fine with us. I mean, this is, kind of your space. So the compromise that happened was that they actually held the conference over at Hassan University, and members of the American consulate team came to the conference. It was very successful. It's just a matter of the spaces, which is all about this question of diplomacy that gets played out. And the final element I want to speak about on this sort of diplomacy front is this question of the Jewish community in Morocco. So we have our panel. I won't read you this entire blurb from the Constitution of Morocco, but the way Morocco defines itself is that it is a multicultural nation, the Kingdom of Morocco. It's multicultural and it's also Muslim, but it is proud of having all of these multiple religious and cultural influences as a part of the nation's identity. So we actually print this constitution, I don't know if it's the preamble exactly, but it's a part of the constitution. It's printed on our Kingdom of Morocco panel, which opens this Morocco in World War II exhibit. And then we have our Moroccan Jews during World War II. So we talk about how in 1948, more than 260,000 Jews lived in Morocco, and that Jews had been living there for 2,500 years. And then we talk about the ways in which Sultan Muhammad V rejected the racist laws of Germany via the Vichy government and protected the Jewish citizens. And then we basically talk about how the Sultan was honored by the American Jewish community for his efforts. All of this is true and accurate, but what we don't talk about is what happened right after the founding of the State of Israel, which was very controversial in the entire Middle Eastern world, and a combination of a pressure to immigrate that was being placed on Morocco's Jewish community. Come to Israel, this is your home now. And a rising sort of pan-Arab nationalism that was coming into play across the Middle East, more so in other countries than Morocco, but it did come into play in Morocco, that was placing kind of a push pressure on that Jewish community. And this resulted in a very, very large mass migration of the Jews out of Morocco to Canada, the United States, France, and also to Israel. So there are still Jews living in Morocco, but there aren't 260,000 Jews living in Morocco. There's a much, much smaller number now. Now, the relationship between the government of Morocco and its Jewish citizens and Moroccan Jews of Moroccan descent around the world has remained very welcoming and positive. But you can't tell this whole story in a museum panel. And that was kind of an element where it's, yes, we're saying something that is accurate, but it is not complete. And that kind of leads for room for further conversations. And that gets into this question of next steps. So our colleagues at Hassan proposed that we continue our relationship by looking at legacies of the slave trade in Morocco and the United States. Now, both of these countries have a long history of having economic benefits from enslavement of sub-Saharan African peoples. The trade looked different. So with the US, it was transatlantic. In Morocco, it was trans-Saharan primarily. It was much more heavily involved with the structure of the government and and it's much broader and older. Morocco is a much older country than the United States. So it has undergone a lot of change that the US has not. Now, because Morocco and the US also have this 200 years of diplomatic friendship, there's also this kind of long history of thinking about these issues together. So in spring of last year, I taught a course where, in the public history program, where my students explored these two cultural legacies of slavery and developed a digital exhibit. And Moroccan counterparts in the American Studies program at Hassan University served as essentially a focus group for us. Looked at our proposal, looked at the exhibit, helped to provide us with resources, and this is ongoing. At the same time, students working with Dr. El-Azhar undertook ethnographic studies of people in Casablanca who have different heritages. So that includes the Jewish community that is there, it includes people of sub-Saharan African descent, and they've written essays. So we're going to be putting together another book where our students will be sharing their essays, and we will about this process of working together. And this is just a little preview, or not preview, but this is what our Faces of Slavery in the US and Morocco online exhibit looks like right now. And as I said, it's still in the process of having all of our wonderful input from our Moroccan colleagues informing it. But we were able to really think through how slavery impacted people who fit into different kinds of categories. And like the Museum of History and Holocaust Education, this exhibit thinks about meeting history face-to-face, very much on sort of what is it like for individual people to experience these events and these legacies. So we will close, I think we have time, with a documentary that students at Hassan University created to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Ben Masik Museum. So I'm going to click through and let this play. If I can make the mouse do what it's supposed to, let's see. There we go.
Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Round 1.
So today, the Bouziane Community Museum is celebrating its 10th anniversary. 10 years of hard and serious work. 10 years of constructive and fruitful work. We have started from scratch, without financial resources, save for our goodwill and the support and trust of some people who believe in our adventure.
إذن هذا المتحف هو نتيجة تعاون ما بين كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بمسك جامعة حسن الثاني بالدار البيضاء وجامعة كينيساو يونيفرسيتي بولاية جورجيا بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. وهذه السنة نحتفل بمرور 10 سنوات على تأسيسه. 10 سنوات مليئة بالعمل، مليئة بالعطاء، مليئة بالأنشطة، مليئة بالنشر، مليئة باللقاءات، وهذا هو الذي أعطى لهذا المتحف صورة مميزة عن الصورة التقليدية للمتاحف بشكل عام.
From Hassan have joined the KSU students in a series of video conferences over the past several months. The KSU team.
The Bouziane Community Museum is unique in its focus as a center of community engagement. Unlike traditional museums that primarily collect and display antiquities and great works of art, the Bouziane Community Museum specifically seeks to document the day-to-day lives of local residents. In this respect, the museum displays a collection of artifacts, old kitchen utensils, old instruments for weaving traditional clothes and carpets, traditional musical instruments, and photographs. عرضت هذه اللوحات في أبريل 2009 في جامعة كينيساو في كندا وفي جامعات أمريكية أخرى.
جميل أن يتحول البئر الذي كان يمنحنا الماء في هذه المنطقة إلى مركب صحراوي حيث يتنوع ماؤه بين تسويق الموسيقى، تسويق اللغة وتسويق الفرشاة المغربية. هذا يدل دلالة قوية على أن المكسيك أنتجت ماء متنوعا من ماء طبيعي إلى ماء رمزي ومركب.
In line with its mission, the museum has conducted a number of actions to serve the students of the university and the people of Bouziane. To name only a few of these projects, creating the first exhibition about Bouziane and Casablanca, recording 30 interviews of the inhabitants of Bouziane about their social and human experiences in this district, creating a computer lab in a neighboring primary school that was supplied with 20 brand new computers. Our students volunteered to teach English and to provide school tutoring in a public primary school in the neighborhood of the university. Building a website, creating community, the Casablanca Kennesaw project. It focuses on establishing community dialogue and connection through a series of collaborative programs, celebrating the International Museum Day at the university, we invited two museums, the Bouziane Museum and Abdelmajid Islami Museum, to display some of their exhibitions on campus.
We have worked on a project with partnership with Kennesaw State University, which was about Morocco in the Second World War.
That tries to record shared values and to celebrate the already strong diplomatic and historical relationships between the Kingdom of Morocco and the United States of America.
And we have visited 3 museums. They were in Rabat, in Saleh, so it was a really, really beneficial visit.
What we think of as kind of the first museum in America in 1786. So fairly early for us, drop in the bucket in Moroccan history, right? Morocco is a much older country than the United States. And other collections grew and grew, and as he gathered more and expanded his collection and his presentation to the public.
تواجد هذا المتحف داخل الكلية تتويجه بعد 10 سنوات هو أن يتوج المغرب ضيفا شرفيا للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في جامعة أتلانتا.
الدراسات تشتغل على مواضيع في بروجرام شحال منهم معشوقا قالوا لا الشام ولا مالكا اسمع غير اوكي هذا مكان.
I would always bring up the interesting history in the United States in 1942 with Morocco. Morocco was virtually unknown by the United States in 1942, but the United States recognized that actually, if Hitler were to be stopped, the best way in was through the back door. And the back door was North Africa. And Morocco is the first part of North Africa. And made an exhibit out of it for the public and for the students here at the university. This is a very good thing. And the community speaks for itself in its own museum. It's small, it's not pretentious, but you have gone to record the personal histories, the oral histories of families and individuals who have lived here. Many came here from the countryside, from the Shawiya, from Dukala. They settled here in the 1950s, 60s, and especially the 1970s. And they created this community.
We can talk about the fact that the museum helped me a lot to develop like teamwork skills and to get to know people from all over the world.
We had delegations from all over the world, and about the delegation, it really helped me like build my personality. Before I was like a shy person. I didn't feel confident to talk in English with people, and having all those delegations like forced me to do that. And like just having this experience and seeing like people amused about our artifacts and the things that we took for granted actually.
دور هنا كبير في أن يستمر اشتغال هذا المتحف لكي يصل إلى ما وصلوا إليه بفضاء متميز بتقنيات وأدوات متميزة وبآفاق أخرى تتعدى حدود الفضاء الذي يتواجد فيه أو تتواجد فيه كلية الأدب وعلوم الإنسان والروسي تتعدى حدود دار البيضاء ونظرات دار البيضاء في المتخيل العالمي وأيضا للمغرب.
عندي واحد الأمانة في جبل على النهار ديالي وبغيت ندوزو لهذا الجيل الصعيد هذا الشباب باش يتهلا في هذا الشيء ديالنا لأن هذه أثرنا تدل علينا فندور على نائل الآثار. إذا مشى هذا الشيء راح نمشي مشات البصمة ديالنا إذا ما خدتوش نتوما مش كيف خدنا حنا هذه الأجيال وحتى الله باش ندوزو الميساج وليداتنا وندوزو لكم نتوما اللي هذه راه أمانة عندكم ونتمنى لكم التوفيق.
الدور الفعال الذي يلعبه الطلبة في هذا المتحف له دور أساسي في إحيائه أولا في تطور الإنسانية وفي فتح آفاق أخرى جديدة له في المستقبل. التوفيق لنا جميعا إن شاء الله لكي يكون هذا المتحف في مستوى طموحاتنا في مستوى طموحات طلبتنا.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So I think as we close, thank you, Dina. As we close, I know we have in the audience a couple people who've played a fairly critical role.
Shut that down, or are you going to have something
Yep.
else?
Yep, let me.
Yep. We don't want to start another video. So Dr. Dickey, do you want to add anything either from the podium or from your seat about what the partnership has meant? Because I know that you've been involved from the very beginning.
I would say it's been a great partnership where there's been some really very rich cultural exchange, and but it's also required constant tending. And I know that there was a period of time after we concluded our second grant where it sort of went dormant, and we were like, I would still communicate with Samir by email and on Facebook and whatnot, but we weren't really doing any projects for a period of time. So we didn't have any funding to do anything, and so it really took some initiative on the part of Adina coming in and being willing to work with students and overcome all these logistical issues of, the fact that their semester system or whatever,
You're right.
is completely different from
Right.
ours. So there's hardly any overlap of when their students are in session and when our students are in session. It's not just like the 5-hour time difference every day, it's the calendar, and so it's much bigger than that.
Well, and we ended up, for each project, it's almost like a relay race. One team would start it, another team would hand it off. There'd be moments of connection. We had a number of workshops and online sort of conversations, but there certainly, the temporal challenges were fairly significant. I think as Jennifer said, when you have a grant and it drives a project, that's really productive.
You have money, and you have
And you have timeline.
and you have deliverables.
Absolutely.
And that keeps you moving and keeps
Absolutely.
the collaboration going. So it's been, I won't say a struggle, but it's required very focused and deliberate effort
Right.
to keep the partnership afloat after the money goes away.
Well, and I think
we don't have money to travel.
Right, and I think you see that with Samir as he describes it too. That the students come and go, the faculty kind of come and go, and there has to be sort of an anchor. Right. And I think we've been really lucky that we found in Samir an anchor. But Joe Thomas here from our Department of Art, obviously, School of Art and Design, is, Joe, you're actually opening the next phase with the Barada exhibit. You want to talk just a moment about, about the connection?
Just that there's my visit to Morocco with Catherine, we discovered an artist, a Franco-Moroccan artist who's going to be showing in the Zakra Museum starting in January.
Right.
And wouldn't have found him if it had not been for that trip to Morocco and visiting the museums there.
Well, and I would say the other team here at Kennesaw that's been really active was the theater department, theater and performance studies, right? Really and Karen Robinson. And so I would say that really Karen's team, I know that that's ebbed a little bit, as Jennifer described. They do sort of go, there are high points and then it goes dormant, and then there's another and it goes dormant. We've been sort of consistently moving forward with projects, but I think Karen's team not only did they have a very important theater festival, and won some really prestigious awards, and the students worked in sort of that exchange. So I think if there's a theme here, it's that really it has taken some tending and some really careful strategic work, but what has really kept it going have been students. And when students engage, and we make all of our projects student-centered, but when students engage, not only does it make it richer, but it also supports the mission of our university, and I believe the mission of Hassan, which is sort of recruitment and retention and progression toward graduation. I think Stephanie alluded to that when you engage in these kinds of projects, capstone projects, exhibit projects, undergraduate research, all of those together are what bind you not only to your faculty and your department, but to your university. And we find that students that engage in those projects tend to have much higher rates of graduation, go on to graduate school, and really stay engaged. So we're really quite proud, I think, of the work. And Dan, thank you for inviting us to talk about it. I think we're right on the money at time. Maybe a few questions as we close out, if anybody has any.
I just had one question. I sort of was asking earlier. The slavery experience project that's occurring now. Is there a discussion of Mediterranean slavery that predates the Atlantic slave trade?
To a degree, and one of the main challenges of that project is one of chronological scope, because there are many more centuries that Morocco has had a complicated relationship with Europe and with other parts of Africa, and the progression of dynasties in Morocco, and how the ruling class kind of dealt with these different subclasses, including merchants who may have been involved in the slave trade, and then the recruitment of and re-enslavement of people of sub-Saharan African descent. At one major moment in Moroccan history. All of that it happens before the United States is even a country. So one of our big challenges was
not concurrent histories.
Yeah, non-concurrent histories. It reminds me of this, this sort of temporal challenge that we just continue to face. And in the United States, we all have a tendency to become a little bit centered on our own historical challenges, our own struggles with our past. And so one of the things that, it certainly puts that into context when you start to do this kind of international work and realize that everybody has really complicated histories and therefore complicated legacies.
And when you're pulling it into a 10 or 12 panel exhibit, right, you've got
to make choices.
Yeah, absolutely. But even in the digital component, thinking through organization. Right. And one of the ways that we tried to do that was by making it not so much about chronology, but more about categories. So the rulers, political leaders, thought leaders, so people who are from the Muslim community and the Christian community, who are both justifying slavery and also advocating for its abolition. Those stories come through, when you do the research. So you can make these comparisons, but you just have to think of different ways to encompass the entire thing.
So we'll all be at Joe's opening in January, so we're very excited.
So we'll do I'll do a gallery talk at I think during the week of the conference.
Great.
There'll be a very short, brief gallery talk. Because it's a very small show, it's not
Yeah.
a big show.
But it's nice to see, I mean, each of these moments, you get added to the timeline of this long partnership. And I think, Dan, the fact that you all chose U of Morocco has been really exciting. Certainly for us to see, we don't usually think about our project at 30,000 feet, but when you do a presentation like this, you really do see the sort of breadth and depth.
I was wondering what was the original spark? Because I wish I had seen this before I went to Morocco,
Yeah.
because I would have known more about the history of the project. But like way back in like 2005, how did it get started? Was there a person?
Yeah, I believe Betty Siegel had met, and I have this chronology somewhere, but Betty had met President Borkia at an international conference, and they just had a conversation.
Oh, I see.
And then it's in 2007 when she comes.
The reason Morocco is because
is really
of Betty
because
Siegel
the two
having a
presidents.
contact.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there had been sort of informal conversations and a few small exchanges, but it isn't until the museum, President Borkia says, we want to create a museum, that it really gained traction. And the museum has been the one kind of constant throughout the whole partnership that has brought forth publications, exhibits, online exhibits, grants, conferences.
It's been the most sustainable partnership of all.
And the most public, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think Samir and the university certainly look at it with great pride. And to be a community museum in Morocco is quite unusual. Most of the museums have one staff member. They open the door in the morning, they sweep the cats out the door, and they close it at night. There's no programming. It's not focused on social history. It's just a different ideal and sort of conception of museums. And so this one, while small, I think has been really powerful. So we're just proud to have played a role in it. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.